this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities of sovereignty, which have now passed to my beloved daughter.
The order did not arrive with a speech, a balcony appearance, or the thunder of a public announcement. It came quietly, carried into a private royal office, and placed before King Charles III. Then came the instruction that stunned everyone who heard it. Queen Camilla's name was to be removed from every official royal document under the king's authority. Within minutes, printers stopped, correspondence was recalled, and one question swept through the palace: what had happened behind those closed doors? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles read the authorization sheet twice before touching the pen. The document covered official royal correspondence, ceremonial papers, approved palace records, future briefing notes, and formal material issued under his authority. In plain terms, these were papers carrying the crown's official voice and recording who was formally represented within it. The king pressed his thumb against the page, signed once, and kept the pen in his hand. He stared at the signature without speaking. What looked administrative on paper felt personal. Camilla learned the news from an aide carrying correspondence that had abruptly been withdrawn. At first, the queen assumed there had been a printing mistake. Then the explanation came. Her irritation vanished. She asked whether Charles had personally approved the removal. The aide hesitated, then answered yes. Camilla said nothing for several seconds. That confirmation hurt more than the missing name itself, because the decision had not been made around the king. It had come directly from him. The palace moved quickly. Staff received a second instruction, ordering prepared material to be checked and reissued wherever necessary. This was no correction to one document. Charles intended the change to move through the royal system. A royal consort is the monarch's spouse, and removing that consort from formal records carries symbolic weight because those records define who is officially presented alongside the sovereign. William received the news separately before the instructions circulated more widely. The prince did not react with shock. He became still. He asked when the order had been signed, then requested to see his father privately. That restraint suggested something unsettling. The future king may already have understood what had forced Charles to act. Camilla, meanwhile, demanded a private audience with her husband. Her voice was controlled, but the humiliation underneath it was unmistakable. She wanted one answer from Charles himself. Why had he decided that her name could no longer remain where it had stood? And to understand that, the story must move beyond the paperwork to the three people who knew exactly how personal this decision had become. Behind the formal language were three people carrying three very different fears. Charles faced the possibility that protecting the crown might require humiliating the woman beside him. Camilla faced something even more terrifying, the possibility that her position could begin disappearing before she herself was formally removed from anything. And William, standing between loyalty to his father and responsibility for the monarchy he would inherit, knew one wrong decision could turn a private marriage crisis into a family war. William paused outside his father's private office and quietly asked the equerry whether Charles was alone. An equerry is a senior royal aide who assists members of the family with official duties and personal arrangements. When the answer came back yes, the prince straightened his jacket and exhaled. He left the briefing folder outside. That choice mattered. William was not entering as the future king demanding an explanation. He was walking in as a son who knew his father had just taken action against the woman he had spent years defending. Charles looked exhausted when his son entered. The king admitted that signing the order had been harder than he expected. He did not regret protecting the crown's authority, because official royal documents speak in the monarch's name and help establish who has permission to act within that system. But the decision exposed something painful. After years of publicly protecting Camilla's place beside him, he had now personally authorized the removal of her name. The monarch could defend the decision. The husband could not pretend it did not hurt. Camilla was refusing to retreat. When an aide suggested delaying her requested meeting with Charles until emotions cooled, the queen rejected the idea immediately. She would hear the explanation from him, not through staff. Her anger was real, but humiliation cut deeper. She had been diminished inside her own household without warning. and she believed the man who had spent years asking others to accept her had now delivered the most painful rejection himself. William finally asked the question hanging over everything. Had Camilla known before the order was signed? Charles fell silent. The prince waited. Then his father answered with a single word, "No." That admission changed the conversation, because it showed how badly trust had deteriorated. The king had believed advance warning might create another confrontation before he could act. Then Charles told his son something worse. Removing Camilla's name had not been his first response. He had already tried a smaller intervention. A warning had been given. A correction had been requested. It had failed. William leaned forward. What could possibly have happened to make a warning insufficient? Charles hesitated before answering. Everything, he said, had changed 3 days earlier during one royal ceremony. The palace had awakened to the consequences that morning. But the real point of no return had already happened, and one quiet act at that ceremony had convinced Charles that a boundary had finally been crossed. Every palace crisis has a moment that later appears obvious, the instant when private irritation becomes something more dangerous. In this story, that moment came during preparations for a royal investiture at Windsor. What should have been routine became the confrontation Charles could no longer dismiss. A ceremonial program was changed. A senior aide objected. Camilla refused to reverse it. And by the time the king learned exactly what had happened, the dispute was no longer about protocol. It was about authority. Camilla had requested expanded wording for her name and role across the official program for the Windsor Service of National Merit and its supporting correspondence. A royal investiture is a formal ceremony where the monarch or another senior royal presents honors to people recognized for service or achievement. The problem was not that the Queen appeared in the material. The problem was that the wording went beyond what Charles had already approved, turning what might have looked like a minor edit into a direct question of who controlled the Crown's official voice. Charles discovered the change during an afternoon briefing, when his senior private secretary placed 2 versions of the program before him. The king read the original, then the revised copy. He stopped at the line expanding Camilla's role. His finger remained there. "Who authorized this?" he asked. The secretary explained that the Queen's office had requested the alteration, and that a palace official had already warned her team that Charles needed to approve it first. That detail changed everything. Charles had spent years protecting Camilla from criticism, defending her place beside him, and absorbing the political cost of doing so. Now the king felt his authority had been tested inside his own household. He immediately ordered the original wording restored, expecting the matter to end there. Camilla refused to see the dispute in those terms. During a private conversation with Charles that evening, the Queen insisted the revised wording merely reflected her position beside him. She believed an administrative adjustment had been turned into an unnecessary confrontation, but her explanation only deepened his frustration. To the monarch, this was not about prominence. Official wording established authority, and once that boundary became unclear, every future decision could become vulnerable to challenge. Then the situation grew worse. Overnight, staff found several forthcoming papers containing other requested changes connected to Camilla's office that had not received direct approval. William examined one the following morning. The prince immediately understood his father's alarm. If nobody could clearly distinguish between what the king had authorized and what others had added, the crown's chain of command could begin to fracture. Charles had heard enough. He summoned Camilla privately and ordered everyone else kept outside. Not aides, not advisors, not even William. The documents had exposed the breach. Now paper could no longer contain the conflict. Charles and Camilla were finally going to face each other alone. When Camilla entered the king's private room, she did not ask about the ceremony. She did not mention the aides or the altered wording. She went directly to the wound. Had Charles truly ordered her name removed? The king said yes. No raised voices were needed at first. That answer alone changed everything. Years of loyalty, controversy, endurance, and shared history collided with one brutal reality. The monarch had used the machinery of the crown against his own wife. Charles explained that the order had one purpose: restoring a single chain of authorization. That meant every formal decision issued in the crown's name had to be clearly approved by the monarch before becoming official. The king told Camilla that until he could trust the process again, Her name would no longer appear automatically on documents carrying his authority. She stared at him in disbelief. To him, it was control. To her, it felt like erasure. Camilla refused to accept that distinction. The Queen argued that the Windsor dispute could have been corrected privately without humiliating her across the household. Then she asked the question that cut through everything else. "Did you really erase me from your own papers?" Charles did not retreat. "I removed what I could no longer authorize without question." She pushed her chair backward but remained standing, stunned by how sharply he had separated their marriage from the crown. Camilla's anger hardened. She accused Charles of choosing institutional fear over personal trust after everything they had survived together. The king answered immediately. Trust was precisely what the unauthorized changes had damaged. He then disclosed, during that private conversation, that staff had discovered several corrected papers, not merely the ceremonial program. For him, the issue had become a pattern. For her, the accusation felt even worse. She was no longer defending one decision, she was defending herself. Camilla's voice softened when she asked whether Charles now considered her a threat to his reign. The king hesitated. He could not bring himself to say yes, but he would not say no either. That silence wounded her more deeply than anger could have done. Then Camilla asked whether William had pushed him into signing the order. Charles stopped that suspicion immediately. The decision was his. The signature was his. Whatever consequences followed belonged to him alone. He would not allow his son to become the target of a conflict between husband and wife. Camilla turned to leave, then stopped. If Charles intended to remove her name, she told him, he now had to decide whether he was prepared to remove her influence as well. The marriage had reached its breaking point. But a deeper struggle was beginning, because Charles now had to prove who truly controlled the institution behind the crown. By midday, the crisis had moved beyond husband and wife. Secretaries needed instructions. Engagement teams needed revised materials. Household officials needed to know whose approval counted. The palace could not function on emotion, and Charles understood that hesitation would create something worse than scandal, competing centers of power. So the king called a tightly controlled meeting. William was present, senior staff were present. Camilla was not. Before anyone spoke, everyone understood what that absence meant. Charles made his position unmistakable. Every document representing royal authority would now pass through one approved chain before release. In simple terms, the chain of authorization meant the route through which an official decision had to travel before it could legitimately carry the monarch's authority. No household office could alter ceremonial wording independently. That included Camilla's team. The king was no longer asking for cooperation. He was establishing control. William supported the need for clarity, but the prince watched his father carefully. He understood why the boundary mattered. If separate royal offices could change approved wording, confusion over who spoke for the crown could spread quickly. Yet he also understood the personal danger. Camilla could interpret every restriction as punishment, and humiliation could transform a manageable dispute into open resistance. Charles received proof of that danger before the meeting ended. A secretary handed him a draft engagement brief, still carrying Camilla's previous authorization line. An engagement brief is the official information prepared for a royal appearance, explaining its schedule, purpose, and approved arrangements. The king studied the page, drew one firm line through the outdated wording, and returned it. Use the new instruction. Nobody spoke for several seconds. William confronted his father privately afterward. The future king warned that authority could be defended without making Camilla feel publicly destroyed. Charles listened, but refused to soften the system. Indecision, he told his son, would send a far more dangerous message, that a direct order from the sovereign could be challenged until it disappeared. Sophie soon heard about the restructuring through a private family briefing. The trusted confidant immediately saw the emotional fracture beneath the procedure. She told William that Camilla would not experience these restrictions as paperwork. She would experience them as rejection. The prince agreed, but neither could identify a way to protect her feelings without weakening Charles' decision. Then the king went further. Future documents involving Camilla's activities would require clearance through the sovereign's private office, the staff responsible for handling matters directly connected to the monarch. William immediately understood the consequence. The Queen had not simply lost automatic inclusion on paper. Her office had lost freedom to act without another layer of approval. Then came the first real test. Camilla had an important engagement only hours away. The paperwork had already been printed. Authority had been settled around a conference table. Now came the crueler moment. Camilla was about to discover what Charles's order looked like when it entered her daily life. The first revised folder arrived without ceremony. Camilla opened it expecting the familiar arrangement of schedules, approvals, and formal headings she had seen countless times before. Then, she noticed the difference. Her name was gone from the joint authorization page. A line that had once seemed permanent had simply vanished. She stared at the empty space longer than anyone expected. And in that moment, the palace crisis stopped being theoretical. The Queen could finally see what Charles had done. Camilla received the corrected engagement papers from her private secretary and slowly closed the folder. Engagement papers are the official schedules and instructions governing a royal appearance, including who attends and which arrangements have been formally approved. Her engagements had not been cancelled. She was still expected to perform her duties, but Charles had separated her public role from the automatic institutional authority she had previously shared. The distinction was narrow on paper and enormous emotionally. Camilla asked everyone to leave. The Queen remained alone, both hands resting on the closed folder. She fought back tears before finally pushing it away. Losing a printed line was not what wounded her. The message behind that absence was devastating. Something she once possessed through trust now required approval. Charles had made his doubt tangible, and she could no longer dismiss the dispute as an argument that would disappear behind palace doors. Charles soon heard through a private staff briefing that Camilla had canceled a personal lunch. The king said nothing at first. He refused to reverse the order simply because its consequences hurt. Yet the decision was hurting him too. He walked away from the briefing and stood in silence, knowing that maintaining royal authority was now costing him peace inside his marriage. Camilla's office felt the pressure next. Several staff members requested clarification about which responsibilities they still controlled. Some remained untouched, but others now required direct clearance from the king's private office. The Queen realized the change extended far beyond stationery. Her team could continue working, but the freedom they once exercised had narrowed overnight. William recognized another danger immediately. The prince quietly instructed staff that nobody was to celebrate, mock, or gossip about Camilla's reduced authority. He feared factions forming inside the household, because once employees began choosing sides, a family dispute could become an institutional war. The future king wanted stability, not revenge. Then Camilla did something nobody expected. That evening, she requested a completely private conversation with William, not Charles, not an aide. William received the message and paused, surprised by the choice. Until now, the Queen had fought against the restrictions. Perhaps she was finally ready to explain what lay beneath her anger. For the first time since Charles signed the order, Camilla stopped fighting the machinery around her and turned toward the man who would one day inherit it. There were no private secretaries in the room when Camilla met William. No folders, no prepared talking points. She had asked for the conversation because every official channel had become poisoned by the dispute. William expected anger. What he encountered instead was exhaustion. Camilla did not ask him to overturn his father's decision. She asked him one question. Had the future king already decided there was no place for her in the monarchy that would eventually become his? William answered carefully. The prince made clear that he had not written Charles's order and had no intention of turning the crisis into a campaign against her. His concern was the stability of the crown, the system of authority surrounding the monarch, and ensuring that royal decisions remain clear and consistent. If family grievances began controlling official decisions, he warned, the damage would outlive the argument itself. Camilla listened without interrupting. Camilla finally admitted something she had resisted saying before. The Queen explained during that private conversation that frustration had driven her decision at Windsor. She had grown tired of feeling that her role was constantly being measured, limited, and questioned. Expanding the wording had seemed small at the time. Now she accepted that frustration had affected her judgment. She had pushed when she should have stopped. Camilla's voice hardened briefly when she told William she was tired of every request being interpreted as ambition. The prince waited before answering. Intention mattered, he said, but once confidence in procedure had been damaged, intention could not repair everything by itself. She looked down. This time there was no angry response. His words hurt, because they reached the issue she had spent days avoiding. William admitted he understood why Camilla felt erased. But the future king reminded her that Charles would never have signed such an order casually. His father had defended her for years. For him to impose this restriction meant trust had been damaged far more deeply than she wanted to believe. Camilla asked whether that trust could ever return. William said yes, but only if she stopped treating the restriction as an enemy she had to defeat and started treating it as a consequence she could overcome. Then Camilla disclosed something more troubling. She had considered refusing her next official engagement in protest. William immediately warned her against it. A withdrawal would turn an internal correction into a public rupture. Camilla fell silent. Then she agreed. She would attend. She would also stop challenging Charles's documentation order through her staff. William later spoke privately with his father. Charles waited for an explanation, but the prince offered only 4 words. She understands it now. Inside the family, resistance was softening. Outside the palace gates, however, one missing royal name was about to become the loudest story in Britain. By morning, the palace could no longer contain the story. The revised royal paperwork had done what no official announcement had done. It provided visible proof that something fundamental had changed. Broadcasters interrupted regular coverage. Newspapers rewrote their front pages. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace as every new detail spread. Yet the most powerful symbol was not Charles or Camilla. It was the empty space on a formal document where the Queen's name had once appeared. Charles's decision divided opinion immediately. Some saw the king defending royal authority after an internal boundary had been crossed. Others saw something colder, a husband using the institution around him to humiliate his wife. Buckingham Palace, the monarch's main official London residence and administrative headquarters, released only a carefully limited explanation. Officials emphasized authorization procedures and refused to discuss the marriage. But that restraint only intensified public fascination. Everyone could see the consequence. Nobody outside the family knew how deep the wound had become. The story exploded when the fictional morning newspaper The Chronicle published its front page. "The Name Is Gone" dominated the edition. Beneath it appeared 2 versions of the same ceremonial paper, one carrying Camilla's previous listing, the other showing the revised arrangement. Broadcasters repeated the comparison throughout the day. Suddenly, an internal argument had an image the entire country could understand. Something that had existed yesterday was missing today. Crowds gathered near the Victoria Memorial outside the palace. The monument, positioned directly in front of Buckingham Palace, often becomes a natural gathering point during major royal moments. Some people praised Charles for refusing to compromise his authority. Others called the decision needlessly cruel. One woman held a handwritten sign carrying 5 simple words. "A crown is still a marriage." The phrase captured the contradiction at the heart of the crisis. Camilla watched several minutes of television coverage before switching it off herself. The Queen did not explode. She did not cancel anything. Instead, she quietly told an aide that she would attend her scheduled engagement exactly as planned. Hours later, she followed the revised arrangements without complaint and made no attempt to challenge the restrictions. Charles saw the same coverage. The king now understood that his private correction had become a national spectacle. Advisors suggested softening the instruction to calm the headlines, but he refused. Reversing course under pressure would destroy the authority he had fought to restore. Then Charles received a private staff account of Camilla's engagement. She had complied completely. For the first time, he believed she had truly accepted the boundary. That evening, Charles sent her something unexpected, a handwritten request for one final private meeting, not an order. A request. The country had chosen sides. The paperwork was settled. Now only the marriage remained, and Charles and Camilla would have to decide what survived when the crown was finally removed from the conversation. Their final conversation was quieter than the argument that began the crisis. Charles did not summon Camilla through an aide. He asked her to come. She arrived without a folder, without a secretary, and without the anger that had dominated their first confrontation. Between them sat the consequences of everything that had happened. Her name remained absent from the documents. His order remained in force. Neither pretended otherwise. The question now was whether accepting that reality meant the end of trust or the beginning of rebuilding it. Charles spoke first. The king told Camilla that the documentation order would remain because restoring confidence required time. The authorization guidelines, the rules determining who can approve official material issued under royal authority, could not be abandoned simply because public pressure had become painful. Reversing the decision now would suggest that the boundary had never truly mattered. She understood. For the first time, she was no longer asking him to retreat. Camilla accepted the restriction without surrendering her dignity. The queen did not apologize for wanting her position respected, but she acknowledged that changing approved material, without Charles's explicit consent, had crossed a line. He placed a fresh copy of the guidelines between them. She looked at the folder but refused to touch it. "You don't have to explain it again." The king closed it and moved it aside. Suddenly, there was no procedure left between them, only a husband and wife confronting what they had done to each other. Camilla finally admitted what had hurt most. Losing her name from those documents had made her feel as though decades of standing beside Charles had been erased in a single morning. The king answered that he had never intended to erase their history. He had acted because royal authority could not become uncertain, even when the person crossing that boundary was someone he loved. Then he admitted his own failure. He should have warned her personally before signing the order. She accepted that admission. William learned the outcome afterward through a private conversation with his father. The prince heard that nothing had been reversed, but Camilla would continue her duties under the new system. He understood the balance immediately: consequence without destruction, boundaries without banishment. The future king had watched both sides discover that preserving the monarchy sometimes required separating affection from authority. Nothing returned to what it had been. Camilla's automatic place within official documentation remained altered, while her public role continued. Charles kept his decision. She accepted its consequence. Their marriage survived, but with a wound neither could pretend had never existed. And that became the final meaning of the crisis. The crown survived because Charles refused to blur personal loyalty with royal authority. Camilla remained beside him because accepting a boundary did not require surrendering her place. The monarchy emerged changed but intact. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.